A while back I've seen a picture of a really simple but in my opinion perfect circle jig for the router table. Unfortunately though I can't remember where I've seen the picture, so I can't give credit. But that's the jig, has a little slider. So let me show you how I build it. And the only tools you will need is the router table itself and a drill, maybe a few hand tools. But first let me show you how it works. So I have my stock material and the slider for the jig. It has a pin. This one has 3mm, this one 4. And that's the pivot point. So I drill a 3mm hole in the center now. The slider then gets attached with a knob from this side. I have a little mark on the piece with the radius that I'm looking for, in this case just 9 cm. And I can line that up with the jig. And then this jig also double functions as a beam compass. After rough cutting the circle with any saw, it's over to the router table with a flush trim router bit. And there I've got a perfect circle, and if you'd use a sharper router bit, also without burning. Now, really cool about this jig is that if I need to press fit this circle somewhere and need to make it a tiny little bit smaller, that's very easy to do. I just need to put it back and I can adjust a tiny amount and then just reroute the circle. The build starts with a strip of plywood. In my case it's a piece of phenolic resin plywood that I had a scrap piece laying around. Regular plywood, but preferably birch plywood, works just fine. Mine is 50mm thick, that's about 5/8 inch. A little thicker would be also okay, but not thinner. Then it's 35mm wide, a little less than 1.5 inches. That doesn't matter that much. And the length depends on the size circles you want to make. In my case, it's about 40 centimeters long. The first thing to do now is to make this cutout that the flush trim router bit fits into. It's the only tricky part because you have to make this in one go, except if you have a flush trim router bit with a bottom bearing the same size or any other router bit the same size, then you can make this in multiple passes. I'll just do it one full pass. I just eyeball center this because it doesn't really matter.
Make sure to have a good grip on the piece, then this is no problem.
There's a very high chance that you get some burn marks. They don't matter at all. And I cut it as deep so that the full bearing and a little more is inside the slot. You could also cut another slot for a different size flush trim bit on the other side, but since this bit is such bullshit that it won't even cut cardboard properly, I won't do that. I instead made 2 holes with smolts on this end for my mechanical pencils that I can just stick in there and then use this jig as a beam compass on this end. Next is to make the big slot for the sliders, and therefore I used 9mm or 3/8 inch plywood. They're about half the width of the piece and the length, I don't know, 5 centimeters, doesn't really matter. Then I installed a straight bit in the router table that's smaller than the sliders, and it sticks out about 1 millimeter for now. Then I again roughly centered the bit to the piece and made 2 marks on the fence and also 2 marks on the piece itself. They tell me where to stop routing the groove.
By flipping the piece around, the slot will end up in the middle, and also make sure to always cut against the rotation of the router bit.
Now I move the fence back by a little bit and route again.
Then just repeat that until the slider fits.
The slider should have a little bit of play, No need for a very tight fit.
With the correct distance, you can then raise the bit a little and make the slot deeper. I made mine in 4 passes.
The final depth should be so that the slider is slightly below this surface. The through slot of course now needs a smaller bit and enough clearance for a M6 or 1/4 inch bolt.
I again did this in multiple passes, but only the last pass looks interesting. Here, after flipping the piece around, you can again see that I'm cutting against the rotation.
And that's all there is to this piece. Now making the sliders. These are the sliders that I already made for the other one. This one has a 10mm pin with the embedded nut. And if the pins are smaller than the slots, you can make them double-sided. So here I have a 4 and here a 3mm pin. And both of them work. So now I think I'm making one with a 5mm pin and one with a pointy pin to use with the beam compass. At first I am embedding the nuts, and therefore I roughly have to find the center. I need to drill the holes a little bit deeper than the nuts are thick.
The diameter of the bit is the wrench width of the nut, 10mm in this case.
And of course the second one from the other side. And then all the way through.
With a smaller bit, of course.
To pull the nuts all the way in, I'm using the bolt itself with a washer. The 5mm pin is a shaft from my old Warner drill bit, and for the compass I'll use a nail.
The pin could also be a wooden dowel or a nail with the tip cut off.
The knob consists of a small bolt with a washer and can be anything from a square block to a nice star knob like this. I've linked paper templates to this in the video description, and with that the jig is finished and ready to use. Well, and that's it. I've already used it a couple times in a project and it's so convenient that this basically has no setup time. You just drill a hole, set the radius and start cutting. And then storing it is very easy because it's so small. And also making this was very simple and quick. I made this in about an hour. The only disadvantage I would say is that you are kind of limited to the stock thickness for what your router bit allows, and that at some scale it doesn't make sense anymore to use this jig. Then you would need some circle jig with a handheld router or similar. But other than that, this will be my go-to jig for making circles from now on. A while back I've seen a picture. And then this jig also double functions as a beam compass. Yeah, not my brightest moment here. The build starts with a strip of plywood. In my case it's a strip of phenolic resin plywood, regular plywood. Next is to cut the big slot for the sliders, and that's best to make them fit. I instead drilled 2 holes for my 2 mechanical pencils that I can stick in there. Put it on the piece and start. It's not what I wanted to say. And that at some scale it doesn't make sense anymore to use this jig. So